Chapter 27 of Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Peter Dan. Chapter 27. Already the legend had gifted him with supernatural powers. Yes, it was said, there had been many ropes cunningly disposed, and a strange contrivance that turned by the efforts of many men, and each gun went up tearing slowly through the bushes like a wild pig rooting its way in the undergrowth. And the wisest shook their heads. There was something occult in all this, no doubt, for what is the strength of ropes and of men's arms? There is a rebellious soul in things which must be overcome by powerful charms and incantations. Thus old Sura, a very respectable householder of Patazan, with whom I had a quiet chat one evening. However, Sura was a professional sorcerer also, who attended all the rice sowings and reapings for miles around, for the purpose of subduing the stubborn souls of things. This occupation he seemed to think a most arduous one, and perhaps the souls of things are more stubborn than the souls of men. As to the simple folk of outlying villages, they believed, and said, as the most natural thing in the world, that Jim had carried the guns up the hill on his back, 2 at a time. This would make Jim stamp his foot in vexation and exclaim with an exasperated little laugh, "What can you do with such silly beggars? They will sit up half the night talking bally-rot, and the greater the lie, the more they seem to like it." You could trace the subtle influence of his surroundings in this irritation. It was part of his captivity. The earnestness of his denials was amusing, and at last I said, "My dear fellow, you don't suppose I believe this?" He looked at me quite startled. "Well, no, I suppose not," he said, and burst into a Homeric peal of laughter. "Well, anyhow, the guns were there, and they went off all together at sunrise. Jove, you should have seen the splinters fly," he cried. By his side, Dane Waris, listening with a quiet smile, dropped his eyelids and shuffled his feet a little. It appears that the success in mounting the guns had given Jim's people such a feeling of confidence that he ventured to leave the battery under charge of 2 elderly bogies who had seen some fighting in their day, and went to join Dane Waris and the storming party who were concealed in the ravine. In the small hours they began creeping up, and when 2/3 of the way up, lay in the wet grass, waiting for the appearance of the sun, which was the agreed signal. He told me with what impatient, anguishing emotion he watched the swift coming of the dawn. How, heated with the work and the climbing, he felt the cold dew chilling his very bones. How afraid he was he would begin to shiver and shake like a leaf before the time came for the advance. "It was the slowest half-hour in my life," he declared. Gradually the silent stockade came out on the sky above him. Men scattered all down the slope were crouching among the dark stones and dripping bushes. Dane Waris was lying flattened by his side. "We looked at each other," Jim said, resting a gentle hand on his friend's shoulder. "He smiled at me as cheery as you please, and I dared not stir my lips for fear I would break out into a shivering fit. 'Pon my word, it's true. I had been streaming with perspiration when we took cover, so you may imagine." He declared, and I believed him, that he had no fears as to the result. He was only anxious as to his ability to repress these shivers. He didn't bother about the result. He was bound to get to the top of that hill and stay there, whatever might happen. There could be no going back for him. These people had trusted him implicitly, him alone, his bare word. I remember how at this point he paused with his eyes fixed upon me. As far as he knew, they never had an occasion to regret it yet, he said. Never. He hoped to God they never would. Meantime, worse luck, they had got into the habit of taking his word for anything and everything. I could have no idea. Why, only the other day an old fool he had never seen in his life came from some village miles away to find out if he should divorce his wife. Fact. Solemn word. That's the sort of thing. He wouldn't have believed it. Would I? Squatted on the veranda, chewing betel nut, sighing and spitting all over the place for more than an hour, and as glum as an undertaker before he came out with that dashed conundrum. That's the kind of thing that isn't so funny as it looks. What was a fellow to say? Good wife? Yes. Good wife. Old, though. Started a confounded long story about some brass pots. Been living together for 15 years, 20 years, could not tell. A long, long time. Good wife. Beat her a little, not much, just a little, when she was young. Had to, for the sake of his honour. Suddenly, in her old age, she goes and lends 3 brass pots to her sister's son's wife, and begins to abuse him every day in a loud voice. His enemies jeered at him. His face was utterly blackened. Potts totally lost, awfully cut up about it. Impossible to fathom a story like that. Told him to go home and promised to come along myself and settle it all. It's all very well to grin, but it was the dashdest nuisance. A day's journey through the forest, another day lost in coaxing a lot of silly villagers to get at the rights of the affair. There was the making of a sanguinary shindy in the thing. Every bally idiot took sides with one family or the other, and one half of the village was ready to go for the other half with anything that came handy. Honour bright, no joke. Instead of attending to their bally crops. Got in the infernal pots back, of course, and pacified all hands. No trouble to settle it, of course not. Could settle the deadliest quarrel in the country by crooking his little finger. The trouble was to get at the truth of anything. Was not sure to this day whether he had been fair to all parties. It worried him. And the talk, Jove, there didn't seem to be any head or tail to it. Rather storm a 20-foot high old stockade any day. Much child's play to that other job. Wouldn't take so long either. Well, yes, a funny set out upon the whole. The fool looked old enough to be his grandfather, but from another point of view it was no joke. His word decided everything, ever since the smashing of Sheriff Ali. An awful responsibility, he repeated. No, really, joking apart, had it been 3 lives instead of 3 rotten brass pots, it would have been the same. Thus he illustrated the moral effect of his victory in war. It was, in truth, immense. It had led him from strife to peace, and through death into the innermost life of the people. But the gloom of the land spread out under the sunshine preserved its appearance of inscrutable, of secular repose. The sound of his fresh young voice, it's extraordinary how very few signs of wear he showed, floated lightly, and passed away over the unchanged face of the forests like the sound of the big guns on that cold dewy morning when he had no other concern on earth but the proper control of the chills in his body. With the first slant of sun rays along these immovable tree-tops, the summit of one hill wreathed itself with heavy reports in white clouds of smoke, and the other burst into an amazing noise of yells, war-cries, shouts of anger, of surprise, of dismay. Jim and Dane Warris were the first to lay their hands on the stakes. The popular story has it that Jim, with a touch of one finger, had thrown down the gate. He was, of course, anxious to disclaim this achievement. The whole stockade, he would insist on explaining to you, was a poor affair. Sheriff Ali trusted mainly to the inaccessible position, and anyway the thing had been already knocked to pieces and only hung together by a miracle. He put his shoulder to it like a little fool and went in head over heels. Jove, if it hadn't been for Dane Warris, a pock-marked, tattooed vagabond would have pinned him with his spear to a bulk of timber like one of Stein's beetles. The third man in, it seems, had been Tam Bitan, Jim's own servant. This was a Malay from the north, a stranger who had wandered into Patusan and been forcibly detained by Raja Alang as paddler of one of the state boats. He had made a bolt for it at the first opportunity, and finding a precarious refuge, but very little to eat, among the Bugis settlers, had attached himself to Jim's person. His complexion was very dark, his face flat, his eyes prominent and injected with bile. There was something excessive, almost fanatical, in his devotion to his white lord. He was inseparable from Jim, like a morose shadow. On state occasions he would tread on his master's heels, one hand on the haft of his kriss, keeping the common people at a distance by his truculent, brooding glances. Jim had made him the head man of his establishment, and all Patusan respected and courted him as a person of much influence. At the taking of the stockade he had distinguished himself greatly by the methodical ferocity of his fighting. The storming party had come on so quick, Jim said, that notwithstanding the panic of the garrison, there was a hot 5 minutes hand-to-hand inside that stockade, till some bally ass set fire to the shelters of boughs and dry grass, and we all had to clear out for dear life. The rout, it seems, had been complete. Doraman, waiting immovably in his chair on the hillside, with the smoke of the guns spreading slowly above his big head, received the news with a deep grunt. When informed that his son was safe and leading the pursuit, he, without another sound, made a mighty effort to rise. His attendants hurried to his help, and held up reverently, he shuffled with great dignity into a bit of shade, where he laid himself down to sleep, covered entirely with a piece of white sheeting. In Patusan the excitement was intense. Jim told me that from the hill, turning his back on the stockade with its embers, black ashes, and half-consumed corpses, he could see time after time the open spaces between the houses on both sides of the stream fill suddenly with a seething rush of people and get empty in a moment. His ears caught feebly from below the tremendous din of gongs and drums. The wild shouts of the crowd reached him in bursts of faint roaring. A lot of streamers made a flutter as of little white, red, yellow birds amongst the brown ridges of roofs. "You must have enjoyed it," I murmured, feeling the stir of sympathetic emotion. It was immense, immense," he cried aloud, flinging his arms open. The sudden movement startled me, as though I had seen him bare the secrets of his breast to the sunshine, to the brooding forests, to the steely sea. Below us the town reposed in easy curves upon the banks of a stream whose current seemed to sleep. "Immense," he repeated for a third time, speaking in a whisper, for himself alone. Immense. No doubt it was immense. The seal of success upon his words, the conquered ground for the soles of his feet, the blind trust of men, the belief in himself snatched from the fire, the solitude of his achievement. All this, as I've warned you, gets dwarfed in the telling. I can't, with mere words, convey to you the impression of his total and utter isolation. I know, of course, he was in every sense alone of his kind there, but the unsuspected qualities of his nature had brought him in such close touch with his surroundings that this isolation seemed only the effect of his power. His loneliness added to his stature. There was nothing within sight to compare him with, as though he had been one of those exceptional men who can only be measured by the greatness of their fame, and his fame, remember, was the greatest thing around for many a day's journey. You would have to paddle, pole, or track a long, weary way through the jungle before you passed beyond the reach of its voice. Its voice was not the trumpeting of the disreputable goddess we all know, not blatant, not brazen. It took its tone from the stillness and gloom of the land without a past, where his word was the one truth of every passing day. It shared something of the nature of that silence through which it accompanied you into unexplored depths, heard continuously by your side, penetrating, far-reaching, tinged with wonder and mystery on the lips of whispering men. End of chapter 27.